Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. But when you're in love, your heart has a way of glossing over the red flags your mind tries to wave at you. I'm Rose, and this is the story of how I met my husband and his family. David and I both worked at TechCore Solutions as software developers. He caught my eye right away, not just because he was handsome, but because he had this quiet confidence about him. Unlike some of our colleagues who lived and breathed code, David could actually hold a conversation about other things. "Hey, did you catch the new episode of Black Mirror last night?" he asked one morning, stopping by my desk with 2 cups of coffee. That was how it started, simple conversations about shared interests that grew into something more. We discovered we both loved sci-fi shows, hiking on weekends, and had the same terrible taste in B-movies. Our lunch breaks got longer, and our after-work quick coffees turned into dinner dates. Before I knew it, a year had passed, and David wanted me to meet his family. "They're really down to earth," he assured me as we drove to his mother's house. "Mom's excited to meet you, and my sister Sarah lives there too, with her husband Mike and their son Tommy." The house was modest but well kept, with toys scattered across the front yard. Sarah opened the door before we could knock, bouncing her 4-year-old on her hip. "Finally," she exclaimed, pulling David into a hug. "Mom, they're here." Linda, David's mother, appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron and a warm smile. "There's my successful son," she beamed, hugging him tight before turning to me. "And this must be Rose. David's told us so much about you." During dinner, I watched how they interacted. They seemed like a normal family, clearly proud of David's achievements at work. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until Sarah started talking about Tommy's upcoming birthday. "David," she said, giving him her best puppy dog eyes, "Tommy's been begging for that new Nintendo game." "The one with the dinosaurs?" "Sarah," David started, but his mother jumped in. "Oh, let him spoil his nephew a little. You're doing so well at that fancy tech company," Linda laughed, patting David's hand. Then she turned to me with what seemed like a light-hearted smile. "I just hope after the wedding, he won't forget he has a mother and sister to take care of too." I smiled politely, thinking she was joking. Everyone laughed, and the conversation moved on. I didn't realize then that her words weren't actually a joke at all. 6 months later, David and I got married in a small ceremony. We found a nice apartment for rent near our office, and I thought we were starting our life together perfectly. The honeymoon phase of our marriage didn't last long, literally. We'd barely unpacked our suitcases from our actual honeymoon when the requests started rolling in. First, it was Sarah calling about Tommy's school supplies. Then Linda needed help with some home repairs. The requests were endless, and each time, David would pull out his wallet without hesitation. At first, I tried to ignore it. The amounts weren't huge, and David made good money at TechCore. But it started to feel like death by 1,000 cuts, $100 here, $200 there. Every week brought a new emergency that only David could solve. One night, after Sarah called about needing money for Tommy's new winter clothes, I decided it was time for a conversation. I waited until David and I were doing the dishes together, our nightly routine. "Hun," I started, carefully choosing my words, "can we talk about something?" He looked at me, soap suds up to his elbows. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about the money, for your family." I saw his shoulders tense slightly. "Don't you think it's becoming a bit excessive?" David's face flushed with embarrassment as he dried his hands. I know. I'm just used to helping them out. I've been doing it since I got my first job." "But your mom has a good pension," I pointed out gently. "And Sarah has Mike, shouldn't he be providing for his own family?" David let out a long sigh and leaned against the counter. "Mike, well, he hasn't actually worked in over a year." "What?" I nearly dropped the plate I was drying. "Why not?" "He keeps quitting. Every job he gets, there's always something wrong. The work is too hard, the boss is unreasonable, the commute is too long." David ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. "There's always an excuse." I set down the dish towel and turned to face my husband. David, I love how much you care about your family. But we need to think about our future too. We want to buy a house someday, right? Have our own children? Of course, he nodded. Then we need to start prioritizing our own family, I said softly, taking his hand. Supporting your mom and sister is kind, but we can't keep doing it at the expense of our own dreams. David was quiet for a long moment, absently playing with my fingers. Finally, he looked up. You're right. We should be saving for our future. What if we set up a separate savings account specifically for the house? We can put a fixed amount in there every month, no touching it for any reason. That sounds perfect, I smiled, relieved he understood. We spent the rest of the evening planning our savings strategy, and for the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly on the same page about our future. 2 months into our new savings plan, Linda invited us over for Sunday dinner. I had a nagging feeling about it, but David insisted we should go. They're still family, he said, squeezing my hand as we drove over. The tension was palpable from the moment we walked in. Sarah was setting the table, her movements sharp and angry. Mike was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Linda's smile seemed forced as she hugged David, barely acknowledging my presence. The first 20 minutes of dinner were filled with awkward small talk about the weather and Linda's garden. I pushed my meatloaf around the plate, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. David, honey, Linda began, her voice dripping with sweetness, I noticed you haven't sent any money for the past 2 months. Is everything okay at work? The clinking of forks against plates stopped. I could feel everyone's eyes on us. David cleared his throat, and I saw him straighten his shoulders, something he always did when he was nervous. Actually, Mom, he said, his voice steady but quiet, Rose and I are saving up to buy a house. We want to start our own family soon. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down, her eyes boring into me. Sarah's face turned red, and I could see the storm brewing. A house? Sarah's voice cracked. While I'm here pregnant with my second child, barely able to afford prenatal vitamins? Do you know how expensive baby things are these days? I felt my blood begin to boil. 2 months of biting my tongue, and I couldn't hold back anymore. Maybe your husband should think about that, I said, nodding toward Mike, who was still somehow managing to check his phone under the table. Sarah's face crumpled. How dare you? You're so cruel. The tears started flowing, right on cue. You don't understand our situation. Mike finally looked up from his phone. Hey, I'm trying here. Do you know how hard it is to find a good job in this economy? I'm dealing with depression, you know. Something in me snapped. Depression didn't stop you from having another baby, did it? The room exploded. Sarah wailed louder, Mike started defending himself about his job search, but Linda's voice rose above them all. You, she pointed her finger at me, face contorted with rage. You're trying to turn my son against his own family. We were happy before you came along with your selfish ideas. Selfish? I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped against the floor. Wanting to build a future with my husband is selfish? Mom, stop, David tried to interrupt, but Linda was on a roll. She's poisoning your mind against us. Your own mother and sister. How dare she tell us we can't have help from our own family? I couldn't take any more. Without a word, I grabbed my purse and walked out. David followed close behind, and we got into the car in silence. The sound of Linda's shout still echoed from the house as we pulled away. The drive home was painfully quiet. I watched the streetlights flash by, fighting back tears of frustration. Finally, as we pulled into our apartment complex, David spoke. You were right, he said softly. About everything. But maybe we need to be more gentle with them. They're not going to change overnight. I turned to look at him, saw the conflict written all over his face. Part of me wanted to argue that his family didn't deserve gentleness, that they needed a reality check. But looking at my husband's pained expression, I just nodded. The aftermath of our dinner confrontation played out in the most modern way possible, on social media. Sarah began posting daily updates that made my blood boil. Struggling to afford prenatal vitamins for my baby. Pregnant and broke, family struggle, one post read. Another showed an empty shopping cart, having to cut back on groceries this month. Sometimes I wonder how we'll manage with another little one on the way. The posts kept coming, each one more dramatic than the last. Pictures of Tommy looking sad beside empty toy store windows, long paragraphs about the importance of family support, pointed comments about some people having their priorities wrong. I caught David checking his phone constantly, his face getting more strained with each notification. One evening, after he'd been particularly quiet, I found him staring at a photo Sarah had posted of Tommy's worn-out shoes. "You can send her something," I said softly, touching his shoulder. "Small amounts. Just, let's keep our savings plan intact." The relief on his face was immediate. So David started sending Sarah a modest monthly amount again. Like magic, the tragic social media posts decreased, though they never completely stopped. Linda began extending dinner invitations once more, though the atmosphere was far from warm. "Would you like more potatoes, David?" Linda would ask warmly, then slide her eyes past me as if I were invisible. Sarah would only address her brother, speaking about me in the third person even when I sat right there. "I wonder if your wife would mind passing the salt," she'd say, staring at the ceiling. I took it all in stride. Because while they were busy giving me the cold shoulder, something amazing was happening at work. TechCore landed a massive contract with Global Tech, one of the biggest names in the industry. David and I had both been instrumental in securing the deal, and our compensation reflected that. Suddenly, our combined income nearly doubled. Our savings account grew faster than we'd ever dreamed possible. We kept living modestly, but allowed ourselves a few luxuries, a new hybrid SUV to replace David's struggling sedan, a weekend trip to the coast here and there. As our bank account grew, so did our dreams. We started looking at real estate listings, discussing neighborhoods, planning for our future. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly moving forward. It was during one of our now tense family dinners that Linda dropped her latest bomb. I was quietly eating my pot roast, trying to ignore the usual cold shoulders, when she cleared her throat dramatically. "I saw your vacation photos on Facebook," she announced, fixing me with an icy stare. "Palm Springs, wasn't it? That resort looked expensive." I felt David tense beside me. Here we go again, I thought. "Those infinity pools, luxury spa treatments," Linda continued, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Really, David, I don't think it's appropriate to flaunt such a luxurious lifestyle when your sister can barely make ends meet with 2 children." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. As she spoke, the clicking of computer keys provided a steady background rhythm. Mike sat at the desk in the corner, completely absorbed in his newest video game, the third new release he'd bought this month, by my count. I couldn't help myself. "Speaking of making ends meet," I said, gesturing toward Mike, "there are plenty of job openings in tech support at our company. The pay is good, and the benefits are excellent." The clicking stopped for a moment, then resumed even louder. Sarah's face turned that familiar shade of red. "You have no idea what it's like," she snapped. "Try being a mother of 2 before you judge us." "Oh wait, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The barb stung, but I kept my face neutral. Mike continued playing his game, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. Or maybe he just didn't care. I could have pointed out that being a mother was Sarah's choice, just like having a second child while unemployed was their choice. I could have mentioned that the cost of Mike's gaming habit could probably cover those prenatal vitamins she was always complaining about on Facebook. I could have started another fight. Instead, I just shook my head and took another bite of pot roast. Later that night, as David and I drove home, I thought about the monthly transfers he still made to his sister's account. The amount wasn't small, it could have furnished an entire room in our future house, but our new salaries meant we could handle it without derailing our plans. Sometimes keeping the peace came with a price tag, and for now, we could afford it. Meanwhile, Sarah's demands evolved from subtle hints to full-blown gift registries. Every holiday, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, Mother's Day, yes, she expected gifts from her brother for Mother's Day, came with a detailed list of expensive items she needed for herself and the kids. "David, look at this," I said one evening, showing him the latest email from his sister. It was a Christmas list that included designer clothes, the latest iPad, and premium toys that cost more than our monthly car payment. David sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I'll talk to her. This is getting ridiculous." But when he called Sarah to explain that he was already helping with monthly support, the waterworks started immediately. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone, "I'll tell Mom. You care more about your wife's feelings than your own family's needs." After watching David struggle through 3 such conversations, I'd had enough. While he was in the shower one evening, I opened Sarah's latest gift requirements email and started editing. The $800 designer purse became a $400 alternative. The $1,000 iPad became a $500 tablet. Every item, cut exactly in half. "Here," I said, showing David my revised list. "This is what we're doing." He looked uncertain. "Sarah won't be happy." "Sarah's never happy," I pointed out. "But this is still generous." When the gifts were delivered, the reaction was exactly what I expected. Sarah called David in tears, and Linda left a scathing voicemail about cheap knockoffs. At the next family dinner, they both shot daggers at me with their eyes. "I just don't understand why you couldn't get the items I specifically requested," Sarah sniffed. I gave her my sweetest smile. "Oh, but didn't you know? It's not about the price tag, it's the thought that counts. We put a lot of thought into choosing these alternatives." The look she gave me could have curdled milk. A year passed in this strange dance of passive-aggressive gift-giving and tense family dinners. Then came the Easter gathering that would change everything. Sarah waited until everyone was seated at the table, then stood up with what she clearly thought was a radiant expression. "I have wonderful news," she announced. "We're expecting baby number 3. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt David stiffen beside me. A 3rd child? With no income? No home of their own? My mind spun with calculations of how much more this would add to our monthly family support payments. Mike, predictably, didn't look up from his phone. Linda, however, was ecstatic. "Oh, my darling," she cried, hugging Sarah. "This is wonderful news. 3 beautiful grandchildren." Then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "You should take notes, Rose. Sarah's such a wonderful example of a real woman. Here she is, about to have her 3rd child, while you still haven't given David any." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I set down my fork carefully, making sure my voice was steady when I spoke. "I believe in doing things in the right order," I said coolly. "First, build a stable foundation, like having our own home and being able to provide for our children without depending on handouts. Then, start a family." Linda and Sarah exchanged looks, before breaking into artificial laughter. "Oh, Rose," Linda said condescendingly, "you're so corporate. Family isn't about money and houses." "No," I agreed, taking a sip of water. "It's about responsibility." The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I didn't care anymore. Let them laugh. Let them think I was cold and calculating. At least my future children would have a roof over their heads that nobody could take away. Sarah's 3rd baby arrived in September, another boy. Meanwhile, David and I had reached our savings goal. After months of house hunting, we finally found it, our perfect home. A beautiful 2-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a kitchen that made me want to learn to cook properly. It was in an excellent school district, just a 20-minute drive from work. We spent weeks planning renovations, picking paint colors, and choosing furniture. Every room held a promise: the sunny bedroom that would make a perfect nursery, The basement we could turn into a playroom, the office space where we could work from home when needed. Then came the dinner invitation from Linda. "Mom wants us to come over tonight," David said, checking his phone. "She says it's important." Something felt off about the invitation, but I couldn't put my finger on what. When we arrived, everyone was there: Linda, Sarah, Mike, and all 3 kids. They had this strange, almost smug energy about them. Sarah was practically bouncing in her seat, while Linda wore the self-satisfied smile I'd learned to dread. "So," Linda began after we'd settled in, "I hear congratulations are in order. You bought a house?" I nodded, still riding the high of our achievement. "Yes, we just closed last week. It's perfect for—" "Well," Linda cut me off, "that's actually what we wanted to discuss." She folded her hands on the table like a business executive about to close a deal. "You and David are still young, no children yet. You can continue living in your apartment just fine." I felt my smile freeze. What was she getting at? "But Sarah, my poor girl, has 3 beautiful children, cramped up in this house. They need space to grow, a yard to play in." Linda's voice dripped with false concern. "So, we've decided that you should give your new house to Sarah and her family." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But Linda's face remained serious. Sarah was nodding enthusiastically, while Mike finally looked up from his phone, showing interest for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, looking between them. "You want us to give away our house? The house we spent years saving for?" Sarah leaned forward. "I'm a mother of 3, she said, as if that explained everything. "I have a right to provide my children with proper living conditions. You can always buy another house later." I turned to David, my heart pounding. "Are you hearing this? Do you finally see how entitled they are?" But before David could respond, Linda's smile widened. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I raised my son right. He knows where his loyalties lie, with his mother and sister. Isn't that right, David?" Bang! David's fist came down on the table so hard the dishes rattled. He shot up from his chair, his face flushed with anger I'd never seen before. Linda and Sarah actually flinched, their smug expressions dissolving into shock. "That's enough," David's voice boomed through the room. Even Mike dropped his phone. "I have sat here for years watching you manipulate and guilt me. I've supported you financially, emotionally, constantly. I've given you money while you," he pointed at Mike, "sit around playing video games all day. I've listened to you insult my wife, belittle our choices, and demand more and more." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but David cut her off. "No. You don't get to talk right now. Do you have any idea how much money I've given you over the years? Thousands upon thousands of dollars. And now you have the audacity to demand our house?" Linda tried to interject. "David, sweetie. Don't sweetie me, Mom. You think you raised me right? Teaching me that it's okay to leech off relatives? That it's acceptable to demand they give up their home?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what? You actually did raise me right enough to finally see how toxic this all is." He grabbed my hand, pulling me up from my chair. "We're done. All of this? It's over. No more money, no more gifts, no more manipulation. Find someone else to be your ATM." "But the children," Sarah started crying. "Should be your and Mike's responsibility," David shouted. "Not mine. Not Rose's. Yours." Still holding my hand, he pulled me toward the door. "Don't call us. Don't text us. Don't send us your lists of demands. We're done." The last thing I saw as we left was their stunned faces, frozen in disbelief. David practically ran to the car, helping me in before jumping into the driver's seat. As we pulled away from the curb, I couldn't help myself. I grabbed his face and kissed him hard. "I love you," I whispered against his lips. "I'm so proud of you." He hugged me tight, and I felt him trembling slightly. I should have done that years ago. I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up to them. The next few weeks were a hurricane of desperate attempts at contact. Linda called constantly, alternating between tears and threats. Sarah sent lengthy texts about how we were destroying her family. Flying monkeys, in the form of distant relatives, called to tell us how cruel we were being. But David stood firm. He blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, and we focused on making our new house a home. We painted walls, bought furniture, and started planting a garden. Each day that passed, I watched the weight of his family's manipulation lift from his shoulders. One morning, as we sat in our beautiful kitchen, drinking coffee and planning to convert one of the bedrooms into a nursery, David reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For helping me find my spine. For showing me what real family should be like. For being patient while I figured it all out." As I write this, sitting in our cozy living room, I can't help but smile. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you deserve. Sometimes you have to build your own. And that's exactly what we're doing, one day, one room, one dream at a time. The nursery paint samples are spread out on the coffee table in front of me, and tomorrow we have our first appointment with the fertility specialist. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours. And that's all that matters.